It looked like a Hollywood story that had already reached its happy ending. A legendary filmmaker. A quiet, devoted partner. A family raised around creativity, success, and applause. And then, just before sunrise, that story collapsed. A daughter walks into the family home and immediately feels something is wrong. Minutes later, police and paramedics are racing toward a quiet Brentwood street. By the end of the morning, both parents are gone, and the blame points inward. One sibling is accused. The other is blamed. And the timeline doesn't sit right. This story isn't about shock for shock's sake. It's about separating what's alleged, what's supported by records, and what still doesn't add up. Because this case didn't begin with a crime scene. It began years earlier. From the outside, the family looked untouchable. Rob Reiner wasn't just successful, he was admired. Known for stories about friendship, love, and human connection. Michelle Reiner stayed largely out of the spotlight, but people close to the family described her as the stabilizing force, the emotional center that kept everything grounded. Publicly, there was no chaos, no scandals, no warning signs splashed across tabloids. But inside the home, pressure had been building quietly for a long time. Friends say this wasn't a family that didn't care. It was the opposite. They cared deeply, maybe too deeply. Their son Nick had struggled for years with addiction and instability. Rehab after rehab, hope followed by relapse, brief moments where things seemed better before falling apart again. Alongside that struggle, something else grew. Distance. Nick would later say he felt loved but disconnected, like support was there but never fully reached him. Rob, by most accounts, never stopped trying. Michelle never stepped away. This wasn't neglect. It was exhaustion. By the time December arrived, the tension wasn't new. It had been simmering for years, and on one night meant for celebration, that pressure finally showed itself in public. December 13th, 2025 was supposed to be harmless. A holiday season night, a Christmas party hosted by a well-known figure in the entertainment world, full of familiar faces, laughter, drinks, and cameras. From the outside, it looked like just another Hollywood gathering. But multiple people there would later say something felt off almost immediately. According to several witnesses, a heated argument broke out between Rob and his son Nick. This wasn't subtle and it wasn't private. Voices were raised, tension was visible, and people nearby stopped smiling. Guests later said Nick didn't seem fully present, like his emotions were running ahead of his control. The atmosphere shifted fast, from festive to uncomfortable, and it didn't go unnoticed. What made the moment stick wasn't just the argument itself, but what Nick was overheard saying afterward. More than one guest recalled him insisting he wasn't the problem, repeating that he wasn't the one causing the tension, and pointing blame toward his sister Romy. That line spread quietly through the room and followed people home that night. Rob, by contrast, was described as trying to calm the situation rather than escalate it. Witnesses say he didn't shout, didn't storm off, and didn't create a scene. Michelle stayed close to him the entire time, steady and focused. When the family left the party, it wasn't dramatic. They moved deliberately, guiding Nick away from attention, as if trying to keep a private family issue from becoming public spectacle. To outsiders, it looked like two parents doing damage control, trying to protect their son and their family at the same time. But the emotional weight was obvious. One guest later said Nick's expression didn't match the moment. He looked angry, cornered, and detached all at once. That contrast would matter later. What makes this night more unsettling is what happened next. After leaving the party, Rob reportedly took a phone call with a close friend and sounded normal, even upbeat, talking about future creative plans. No panic, no warning. Just hours earlier, though, he had quietly admitted to someone close that he didn't know how to reach Nick anymore. At the same time, Romy would later tell people that Nick had been blaming her for things she hadn't done. By the time the night ended, the celebration was over, but the conflict wasn't. The argument at that party didn't come out of nowhere. It was the public crack in a fracture that had been forming for years. And when the family returned home in the early hours of the morning, whatever tension followed them through the door would never leave that house the same way again. When police arrived at the Brentwood home in the early hours, the scene immediately felt wrong. This wasn't treated as an accident or a routine welfare check. Officers secured the house and shifted into a full domestic homicide investigation almost instantly. What stood out first was what wasn't there. No forced entry. Doors locked, windows secure, nothing broken or disturbed in a way that suggested an outsider had forced their way inside. That detail narrowed the field fast. Whoever was involved didn't break in. They were already inside, or they were let in willingly. Neighbors were questioned up and down the quiet, tree-lined street. Strangely, no one reported hearing anything. No shouting, no alarms, no sounds of chaos in a neighborhood where noise usually carries. Investigators described the silence as unsettling, not peaceful. In a house like that, even small sounds should have traveled. Instead, there was nothing. That absence became part of the evidence. As detectives began reconstructing the night, the timeline became the central problem. Authorities believed the incident happened before sunrise, but the exact minute wasn't clear at first. That uncertainty made every movement afterward critical. Attention quickly turned to Nick's whereabouts. According to records later cited in the case, Nick left the Brentwood home around 4:00 a.m. Shortly after, he checked into a hotel in Santa Monica. Staff there would later describe him as calm and polite, acting like an ordinary guest. No visible distress, no panic, just normal behavior. That calm raised eyebrows. Hours later, investigators searched the hotel room after Nick checked out and reportedly discovered evidence that shifted the entire case. Details of what was found weren't immediately released, but sources said it directly connected the hotel stay to what happened inside the Brentwood home. From that point on, Nick was no longer just a person of interest hovering around the edges of the timeline. He was placed squarely inside it. At the same time, another piece of information added even more weight. There were reports that Michelle had been alive briefly after the attack and had identified the person responsible. In legal terms, this is known as a dying declaration, a rare but powerful form of evidence that can be admitted even though it's technically hearsay. Investigators believed this statement explained why the focus narrowed so quickly. Nick, however, denied everything. He claimed he wasn't there when it happened and again pointed at his sister, insisting she knew more than she was saying. Romy shut that down through people close to her, saying Nick was twisting the story to save himself. 2 accounts. No overlap. And a house that told investigators this wasn't random, rushed, or impulsive. By the time detectives finished mapping the timeline, one thing was clear. Whatever happened inside that home unfolded quietly, deliberately, and during a window when almost no one was watching. As the timeline narrowed, law enforcement shifted from observation to action. Surveillance footage placed Nick moving through Los Angeles later that day, stopping at ordinary places, a gas station, a quick purchase, nothing that looked like someone in crisis. To investigators, that calm mattered. By the evening, police located him near the USC area. The arrest itself was controlled and quiet. No chase. No resistance. Nick followed instructions and was taken into custody without incident. The contrast was striking. Ordinary behavior on the surface, extraordinary accusations underneath. With the suspect in custody, the focus turned fully to science. There were no cameras inside the house and no clean digital timestamps to rely on, so the medical examiner had to build the clock using biology. Rigor mortis and lividity became the anchors. Based on those indicators, examiners concluded both victims died in the early morning hours, many hours before they were discovered. That window aligned closely with the period after the family returned from the party and before Nick's reported departure around 4:00 a.m. The injuries added another layer. Investigators described them as close-range, sharp-force wounds, face to face, not something done from a distance. Forensic specialists focused on the pattern rather than the gore. What stood out wasn't chaos, it was duration. Repeated actions, sustained intensity. Multiple experts reviewing the findings reached the same conclusion. This wasn't random. It wasn't rushed. It was deliberate. One investigator reportedly summarized it bluntly. Whoever did this stayed until it was finished. When detectives confronted Nick with these findings, he denied responsibility again. He insisted he didn't hurt his parents and repeated that Rami had been there after him. His voice reportedly cracked, a mix of frustration and fear. Rami, through people close to her, responded just as firmly, saying Nick was lying because he knew exactly what happened. 2 siblings. 2 stories, and evidence that didn't bend easily. With the forensic timeline locked in and Nick's movements traced across the city, prosecutors escalated quickly. Nick Reiner was formally charged with 2 counts of first-degree homicide, 1 for each parent. Under California law, prosecutors added special circumstances due to multiple victims, pushing the case into the highest possible legal category. The stakes changed overnight. If convicted, the sentence wouldn't be measured in years. It would be life without the possibility of parole. At that point, this stopped being a tragic family mystery and became a full-scale legal war. And the next moment, inside a silent courtroom, made that reality impossible to ignore. On December 17, 2025, the case stepped out of reports and into a courtroom. Security was tight. Cameras were banned. No live feed, no spectacle. When Nick entered, the room went quiet. He didn't look around. He didn't react to the gallery. He took his seat and waited. When the charges were read, 2 counts of first-degree homicide, his posture stayed controlled. When asked for his plea, he answered clearly. Not guilty. He said he loved his parents and would never hurt them. He added one more line that echoed beyond the room. Romy knows the truth. What stunned observers wasn't what he said. It was what he was wearing. A padded self-harm prevention smock, pale and impossible to ignore. That single image spread fast once details leaked. It shifted public perception instantly. This wasn't rumor or internet speculation anymore. This was real, heavy, and dangerous in the most literal sense. The hearing moved forward as if the smock wasn't there, but no one forgot it. The silence in the room felt deliberate, almost clinical, as the legal process took over. Nick barely spoke for the rest of the hearing. When the judge asked if he understood his rights, he answered with a simple "Yes, Your Honor." That was it. No outburst, no visible emotion. Observers later described his face as unreadable, calm mixed with numbness. As he was let out, one reporter claimed Nick quietly repeated the same thing he'd been saying since the beginning. I'm innocent. Rami knows it. The judge agreed to delay the arraignment, resetting it for January 7, 2026, after the defense requested more time. There was no argument from prosecutors. Everyone in the room understood this case was only beginning. Outside the courtroom, attention shifted immediately to what came next. Not the evidence. Not the timeline, but the power behind Nick's defense. Because the attorney standing beside him wasn't just any lawyer. It was Alan Jackson, and that name changed everything. The moment Alan Jackson's name surfaced, the tone around the case shifted. Jackson isn't a quiet, background attorney. He's known for walking into the most explosive trials in the country and fighting them head-on. Hiring him sent a clear message. Nick wasn't preparing for a quick resolution. He was gearing up for a long, aggressive legal battle. To many watching, it looked like a declaration of war. Prosecutors read it that way. So did the public. Almost immediately, another question took over the conversation. Who was paying for this defense? Cases with 2 first-degree homicide charges and special circumstances don't just cost thousands. They can reach 7 figures fast. Experts pointed out that Nick had no visible income stream that could explain that level of legal firepower. Speculation spread quickly. Some believed family estate funds were being used. Others questioned whether that was even legally allowed, while everything remained unresolved. Sources close to the situation claimed this became a breaking point inside the family. Romy was reportedly furious, telling people close to her that Nick was using money that wasn't his, and that their father would never have approved of it. Legal analysts weighed in publicly, calling it a gray area loaded with risk. If shared assets were involved, every dollar could eventually be challenged in court. Nick's legal team pushed back hard, insisting all payments were legal, documented, and above board. They accused Romy of twisting the narrative yet again. Outside the courtroom, emotions ran in every direction. Some relatives and observers argued the case couldn't be separated from mental health, pointing to Nick's long history of addiction and instability. Others rejected that framing entirely, saying compassion doesn't cancel responsibility. Inside the legal system, none of that mattered yet. Prosecutors stayed focused on what they believed the evidence showed. A deliberate act, a clear timeline, and charges that carried the harshest penalties available under the law. At this point, the case stopped being just about what happened inside the Brentwood home. It became a fight over control of the story itself. Truth versus loyalty, evidence versus accusation, and beneath it all, a family unraveling in public while trying to grieve in private. But to understand how it reached this point, investigators and the public alike began looking further back, beyond the night of the crime, into the long fuse that had been burning for years. Long before investigators started building timelines, there was another clock already running inside this family. Nick's struggles didn't appear overnight. By his own account, the sense of disconnection started early. He would later say he grew up surrounded by love but couldn't feel it, like something was blocked before it reached him. People close to the family describe him as quiet, inward, and searching for approval he never quite believed he had. As he got older, that emotional gap didn't shrink, it widened. Substance use entered the picture while he was still young, and once it did, the cycle became hard to break. Rehab after rehab. Short stretches of stability followed by painful relapses. Each attempt came with hope, and each setback took a heavier toll. Rob and Michelle didn't hide it or walk away from it. They stayed involved, paid for treatment, made calls, showed up, and kept believing something would finally stick. Friends recall Rob saying that giving up wasn't an option, because the moment they stopped trying would be the moment Nick stopped believing he could change. In 2015, Rob tried a different approach. He brought Nick directly into his creative world. The film, Being Charlie, was inspired by Nick's own struggles, and during production, something shifted. Nick showed up focused and disciplined. Working alongside his father gave him structure and purpose he hadn't felt in years. People on set noticed it. For a brief moment, the family believed they had found solid ground. But once filming ended, the structure disappeared, and the old patterns returned fast. The relapse hit harder. The disappointment cut deeper. Over time, love stayed constant, but fear crept in quietly. Concern wasn't just about recovery anymore. It was about stability, boundaries, and emotional safety inside the home. The distance between Rob and Nick, the same distance Nick talked about later, only grew heavier. By the time that Christmas party happened, the argument that erupted wasn't a surprise to those closest to the family. It felt like the final spark after years of unresolved strain, exhaustion, and emotional overload. When people say this didn't come out of nowhere, this is what they mean. After the arrests and the court appearances, the noise didn't die down, but the family did something unexpected. They went quiet. No interviews, no public arguments, no attempts to control the narrative in real time. When a statement finally came, it wasn't about evidence or legal strategy, it was about loss. The family described Rob and Michelle not as public figures, but as parents, as people who brought warmth into rooms and held things together when life got messy. Alongside that message was one clear request: privacy. Space to grieve while the truth was still being sorted out. Behind the scenes, the divide deepened. Reports circulated that Nick tried to reach out from custody, hoping to speak with his siblings. Through lawyers, distance was maintained. Whether that was protection, pain, or strategy depended on who you asked. None of it was confirmed in court filings, but the tension was unmistakable. This wasn't just a legal case anymore. It was a family trying to survive something that had already taken everything from them. Tributes poured in from across the entertainment world, celebrating Rob's legacy and Michelle's quiet impact. Friends spoke about mentorship, kindness, and the space Rob gave others to grow. But the contrast was impossible to ignore. While one story honored a lifetime of work and love, another was unfolding inside courtrooms, driven by timelines, forensic reports, and competing accusations. Grief and legacy collided in real time, and the public couldn't look away. As the case moved forward, rumors kept circulating. Whispers of sealed evidence, hints that someone knew more than they were saying. None of it confirmed, all of it feeding the same unresolved question. Nick continued to insist on his innocence, repeating that Romy knew the truth. Romy remained firm that Nick was twisting reality to protect himself. 2 siblings, 2 stories, 1 irreversible outcome. And that's where this case leaves us for now. A quiet house before sunrise. A family shaped by love, struggle, and exhaustion. Evidence that points in one direction, accusations pulling in another. This isn't a story with a clean ending. It's a story the court will have to finish. Until then, the question hangs in the air, refusing to fade. What really happened inside that Brentwood home before the sun came up?